Good afternoon. My name is Ben Obronsel, and today I'll be showcasing my individual strategic analysis report of the JPMorgan Chase company as part of my Management 3000 business policy and strategy level class here at the University of Denver. I chose JPMorgan Chase due to its global influence in finance and strong alignment with my own personal and academic career goals. Let's continue. So, in terms of my own alignment with JP Morgan Chase, they're a leader in the financial, services industry, globally speaking, and as a finance major with minors in business ethics and legal studies, as well as a planned information analytics or minor, JP Morgan Chase resonates with me both professionally, academically, and personally. The firm's dedication to innovation and its core value of client trust mirror my own values in general. My upcoming internship in investment analysis further strengthens my interest in the dynamic data-driven environment at JP Morgan, and I think my overall profile is a great fit. Let's talk about some features of the firm. When we're looking at key features of JP Morgan and Chase, we can see that it's the largest bank in the US with assets totaling $4 trillion. It leads the market in investment banking, generating $3 billion in revenue from that segment in 2023 alone. In consumer banking, it serves 80 million customers and about 6 million small businesses. And in its asset management division is equally diversified with hundreds of billions of dollars spread across equities, liquidity assets, and fixed income. Now let's get into our Pestel analysis. The Pestel analysis looks at incumbent market forces that JP Morgan would have to consider and these challenges in those market forces. And when we're talking about market forces, we're talking about the Pestel analysis, which is political, economical, social, technological, ecological, and legal challenges. So politically speaking, JP Morgan operates under tight, stringent financial regulations from both the US and its international authority counterparts. This could be including, the Federal Reserve, SEC, including, not limited to world banks as well. And another thing that it might have to consider when operating internationally is geopolitical tensions in whilst operating in countries such as China and the US, which might not be in the greatest, geopolitical state together currently. And when we're thinking about economic factors that JP Morgan and Chase would also have to really analyze and consider would be rising interest rates, which may improve their business model as their net interest margins rise, downs, inflation, fluctuating exchange rates, and things that can just affect banking overall. When we're getting into our social and technological factors, there's a growing demand for ethical banking and financial inclusion. So JP Morgan has responded with increased community investments and financial education programs in communities of need. And on the technological front, the firm invests heavily into AI, blockchain, and cybersecurity, both to improve client services and to retain competitive advantage in the fintech-driven marketplace. Finally, for the Pestel analysis, let's look for the environmental and legal challenges. And so environmentally or ecologically, JP Morgan has committed to sustainable financing and reducing its carbon footprint, which has also been, it's complemented not only JP Morgan's strategy here, but also the market has complemented it because there's an increased sustainable finance demand. Legally speaking, they just need to continue monitoring evolving bank regulations, increased litigation risks, for lawsuits and fines, and data privacy laws as well are a big factor to consider. Now, let's analyze Porter's five forces. So Porter's five forces are, generally speaking, industry forces for the entire industry that JP Morgan will operate in. The first thing we want to consider is the threat of new entrants. And although it's kind of low due to just the high capital requirements and regulatory barriers that are hard to let newcomers in, who would they be? These would be, fintech startups or neobanks like Chime and Revol, and big tech companies like Apple and Google and Amazon will also tried entering the financial system or the financial services industry as well. And that tertiary kind of platform would also be the crypto platforms that are also trying to disrupt the financial services industry in general as well. Power of suppliers, it's just IT infrastructure providers like your Microsoft, your Azure, your AWS, in different data vendors and software developers and top tier financial talent. And so since this is mainly um, you know, within JP Morgan itself, we call this very low as well because it's more vertically integrated in general. And when we're talking about the bargaining power of buyers now, when we're considering buyers, we need to consider the retail customers, the small businesses, the corporations. And so there's more moderate power of buyers here because of how many different groups there are that do similar services in the financial services industry, given your Citigroup, your Goldman Sachs, and other companies like this. So the cost of switching are very low for buyers, which means they are increased in their threat in the industry. The threat of substitutes first, then that's going to be very high just because there's different ways of going about the financial services industry. We kind of talked about them. They kind of have to relate with the new entrants. They're not exactly alike, but think of your fintech companies like your Chimes or your Revolt. So these type of companies are there to disrupt the entire industry in general and be a substitute to that more traditional comprehensive financial services banking and consumer or customer banking, sorry. And in the industry rivals are extremely high as well because so that threat of industry rivals, just like your Bank of America, your Morgan Stanley, more easy switching between companies, and your industry rivals will also have the most competitive pricing compared to you and all these things that you need to consider. Complementers, are really strong in this industry. And this is partnerships with like Visa, AWS that enhance their services over time. And this is definitely something that JP Morgan and Chase should consider over time. VRIO analysis, which is valuable, rare, imitable, and organizable, right? And so we see that JP Morgan Chase has a ton of different sustainable advantages here. So in terms of sustainable advantages, they have a sustainable advantage in brand market or in market position, brand reputation, uh, their client network and relationships, their risk management systems, their talent and leadership, like their CEO, Jamie Dimon. Their regulatory expertise and compliance is out of this world. And in their investment banking division is the best in the world in terms of just revenues. Let's look at some of the temporary advantages or non-advantages. That would be their capital reserves. Even though they have a ton of capital reserves and that ton of financial strength, it's not really rare and it's like normal for the industry. In their economies of scale, it's the same kind of issue. It's good, it's great to have, and it's almost needed to have in the industry, but it's just not rare enough. It's just not going to give them that advantage at all. So in their temporary advantages, something that maybe they could improve on to become a sustainable advantages or an advantage would be their technological infrastructure. It's valuable, but it's kind of easy to replicate. So if they can bridge that gap of imitableness or imitatable-ness, perhaps, they could, give themselves a sustainable advantage there. And that's similar for their digital banking and AI integration. I mean, a lot of different companies have been doing the same thing and trying the exact same methods they have. So as long as they can differentiate within their technological infrastructure and digital banking AI integration, they will start to develop more and more sustainable advantages. Or their strategy is differentiation, and their differentiation is the premium services, investment banking, and wealth management. This would look like a strong, retail and consumer bank. So as well as the premium services, they have advanced digital platforms, right? This is their like Chase mobile app, their JP Morgan Chase app. They're not a pure low cost player in the industry, technically. It uses its massive scales and operational efficiency to keep costs extremely competitive, especially in that B2B side, as that's part of their main source of revenue in the investment banking in general. And so when we're comparing it, we're going to compare it to they're going to be like unlike cost leaders like regional banks. JP Morgan Chase just emphasizes that innovation and quality to compete in their community banking, their investment banking, their asset and wealth management, and as well in their commercial banking. And that can be all the way from retail banking to lending, treasury, and advisory services within commercial banking. But everything that they do synergizes with their business level strategy, so as each of these separate industries builds off information from the one industry. So that's why you can see that's why they compete there, right? And so when we're thinking about these analyses, what would be our strategic recommendation in terms of, putting it all together? And that would look like accelerating your fintech integration. Key strategic recommendation for JP Morgan and Chase would be to accelerate its fintech integration. And this would strengthen its customer engagement via user-centric platforms, enable product innovation, and overall, the goal is to reduce operational costs through automation and machine learning over time. So, as long as JP Morgan Chase can stay ahead of the curve on fintech integration, they will automatically have a sustainable advantage in terms of being more innovative than their rivals. My second strategic recommendation would be to enhance regulatory compliance systems instead of simply, having a system that is reactive to compliance, being more proactive and trying to shape the industry in terms of its compliance systems and how it's all being ran and structured. My third strategic recommendation would be to expand, sustainable finance optioning. So this personally, to me, is really synergizes with my personal and career, aspirations because I want to make sure that there's more and more sustainable finance offerings in the financial industries. But in the market really is behind these sustainable finance initiatives, right? So attracting a more ESG conscious investors and clients, and as more and more of them populate the investor sphere, and it strengthens, the brand reputation overall, and it gives, it taps into new pools of revenue and potentially even tax incentives from these green bonds and sustainability linked loans, And lastly, my strategic recommendation is to optimize acquisition integration as well. This would be meaning making sure that the acquisitions made by JP Morgan and Chase are fully synergized with its current corporate strategy. And if that means, hiring somebody on as to make sure that they're fully oversighted by JP Morgan Chase and their integration into JP Morgan Chase's umbrella. And this would be like, and think about it in terms of like fintech companies or other companies that JP Morgan Chase might acquire in order to capture some of that added value in its value chain. Strategic thoughts: make fintech integration a core capability, turn compliance into a proactive risk intelligence system rather than a reactive intelligence risk system, and then lead ESG finance in the next upcoming years. This would really, really give JP Morgan Chase that special feeling in sustainability and give that brand a whole new meaning in terms of what it means to invest with JP Morgan Chase. And then lastly, approach acquisitions and strategic transformations more efficiently and more synergetically. Thank you.